Record Show.
And co-host Marine Corps Map, coming to you on Monday and Tuesdays in Studio A, noon to 2 Eastern.
And Studio B on Wednesday nights, 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. Eastern, with educational, instructional, information, and situational updates, often with wonderful guests on the current landscape in the U.S. and overseas.
This is a go.
We are with you, side to side, and back to back.
Please join us on Monday through Wednesdays,
as well as other hosts and guests here on Revolution Radio.
We're not gonna take it anymore. That's right, we're not gonna take it anymore. We said we're not gonna take it anymore. That's right, we're not gonna take it anymore.
I'm Reverend Medium Tracy Lockwood, and I'd like to invite you to join me as I discuss life from a medium's perspective. I'll be talking about insights that I've gained through readings, with topics like your guides, angels, animal communication, past lives, our transition, and the afterlife. We'll take a deeper look at the metaphysical meanings of symbols and totems, and I'll give you some practical exercises to help you develop your own natural psychic ability. Join me on From a Medium's Perspective.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Well, it's time to stumble down the road with host Bridgette Lyn Dolgoff and co-host Jenny Vaught as they carry stones, dig holes, and wield their shovels along the way. On Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. This is not a seated event as they talk, run, stumble, carry, dig, drag, laugh, fight, sing and pray, dance and kick and scream, and oftentimes fall. Hey, is that a stone or a buffalo check? Now, here are your hosts for the next 2 hours on carrying stones and digging holes. But I won't be there.
The hell I won't.
Hey there, this is Carrying Stones and Digging Holes with your host, Bridgette Lyn Dolgoff. And just a reminder, Janie Vaught is no longer on the show. So anyway, I've gotten a new intro and I just haven't gotten it up yet. So if you want to go and look up information about our show, you can go to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. online, and you can look on the side, on the left-hand side, and you can see Studio. You can see Studio A or B. You're going to click Studio A, and on the schedule, and then you're going to be able to go down to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and you're going to see the big bee flying towards the flower with legs, full of pollen. That's going to be Carrying Stones and Digging Holes radio show, and you can go on there and look up some information about me and the show and any kind of contact information. Also, we are listener supported only. All of our hosts do what they do for free. We volunteer our time to make a difference by bringing whatever type of radio that we are bringing. Each of us are very different. And so we have, also you can go on Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, and you can go to the funding area. We also now are offering banner advertisement, which is pretty affordable. I'm doing one, so to help support my network. And we also have heirloom seeds, or you can just go on there, say you just don't want to mess with any of it and you just want to donate, you can do that as well. So, keep us on air. A lot of things are changing with alternative media, and help us to help keep bringing the radio shows internationally to you. So anyway, today my guest, I was a little worried my guest wasn't going to make it. And I understand it seems like since the eclipse, there's been a lot more, kind of chaos and drama going on for a lot of people. So I get it. Everything's on different kinds of time loops, I guess, sometimes. But anyway, so my guest is going to be Shannon Brown. And she is from the land of Texas. And we're going to be having more people from Texas on. A lot of people there in that area are really working on drought and flood mitigation and rain collecting and large-scale land restoration and all kinds of amazing things. She has the only contact information she has, and she has a Facebook page where she's posting a lot of the stuff that she's doing, including some of her garden design work. And that is on Facebook, and it is Ecosystem Regeneration Artisans. And so today we are going to start off with topics of rain gardens for flood mitigation. And so we're going to go ahead and get started with that conversation. So Shannon, are you with me?
Yeah, I'm right here with you.
Awesome. All right. So do you want to give us a little bit of background about you and your life and then how you've led up to doing this work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Houston, where Harvey hit this past year. Thankfully, my family's home wasn't flooded. But we did have a lot of wetlands that were filled in to build the subdivision that my home was in. So we were definitely in the danger zone because those wetlands act like giant sponges. And Houston has kind of ignored that and turned it into concrete, which doesn't soak in any water. But growing up in Houston, I got to see a lot of development, a lot of nature space being paved over, and watch the bird life vanish, watch crawfish vanish, watch fish species vanish. This whole ecosystem that was behind my back fence just was gone. It got developed, it got mulched. It should have been declared a wetland. It never was. And the roseate spoonbills, which are this beautiful pink bird that wades through the water, they all vanished. The ibis vanished. The crawfish vanished from that area. And it was a really tragic thing to see. And so at the age of 8, when I started seeing that, it kind of set me on the path that I'm on today. I got involved with wildlife rehabilitation at that time, started volunteering with a local wildlife rehabilitator named Rhonda Murgatroyd, and, stuffed a lot of soggy cat food down baby bird throats. And that sucked. And it was a lot of hard work, and there was a lot of heartbreak involved. And what that taught me was that we can take care of the little baby bird all we want, but until it has the habitat to go back to, until it has the plants that support the insects that its parents are supposed to feed it, it doesn't really, we can fix up as many baby birds as we want, but if they don't have a home to go to, what kind of future do they have? They don't really have much of one. So that kind of brought me into the world of native plants and making habitat gardens that involved native plants that supported the insect species, that supported the bird species, that support, there's this intricate web that I'm sure a lot of your listeners are aware of. And once you start putting the plants back, you get that foundation. And the soil's the real foundation, but the plant life is really so critical. And using the native plants from that area, the species that are indigenous to that area that the birds recognize, and the timing is right, and you have all this abundance of diversity so that there's continuously food throughout the year. It's not like you're just going to get one harvest of corn and that's going to last you through the year. These animals need this complex, diverse ecosystem that's going to provide food continuously throughout the year. So understanding all that with the help of my master naturalist mentors like Margaret Frick and my mom, Sheila Brown, they got me plugged in and started helping me build gardens at the schools I was at. So I've gotten to watch for the past, I guess, 15 years now. Some of these gardens go from being boring, lifeless turf grass, St. Augustine, that had all sorts of ponding problems with lots of water just sitting there and creating mosquito breeding, to beautiful ponds that are full of tree frogs and birds, occasionally a little garter snake. It's a really cool thing to see. And these gardens are being used to teach students at those schools about biology and ecology and science in a very hands-on way. They get to actually see how the food chain works, and it's just a beautiful thing. And I'm so blessed to have come from that background of people with such an intense level of understanding that, to me now, that's just an intuitive basis of who I am in my relationship with the natural world. My mission is to bring back a lot of the native Texas plants that have gone missing and been replaced by monocultures of turf grass. We have a huge problem in this country with 40 million acres of turf grass, and that number just keeps increasing. We'll go to some beautiful countryside and say, how beautiful this is. Oh, we love it here. And then we turn around and we bulldoze it and we destroy everything there that we loved about the place and leave just a few trees. And here in the hill country, it's typically live oaks that we leave. And if you leave just a few live oaks, you've chopped out about 98% of, even more than 98% of the biodiversity that's there. And you leave very, very little food for all of the wildlife. And then people wonder why deer are coming into their yard and eating their landscape plants. And it's because they were there first and we took their home and we took away their food. And so now they're starving. So my mission is to bring back the native plants to support the wildlife. And I'm not exclusive to native plants, but I find that they work best with the rhythm of the seasons, the cycles of drought and flooding that we get. And the animals recognize them. They've had millions of years to develop a relationship.
Yeah. Okay. So can you tell listeners how old you are? I'm not really sure.
I'm 25.
Awesome. Well, we love that. We love that you're in it early. I'm super glad you're in the game early.
Well, it's a privilege for sure. There's a lot of people lifting me up to get here. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah, I was in alternative medicine for a long period of time. Grew up with women who, had skills and talents and abilities to work with plants, all different kinds of plants and the medicines and stuff like that. So it took me most of my life to go back around, right? And then because I wanted to grow my own medicines for people in my practice. And so I ended up going into biodynamic farming and studied at Rudolf Steiner College and studied a lot of amazing things from a lot of amazing people when I started it, like when I was around 38. So now I'm like almost 50, and now it's becoming like, my main focus, like large landscape scale, restoration, how to create, different kinds of areas that, I think like listeners probably don't really understand that if you bulldoze a lot of the area and you take the topsoils off, now that soil is destroyed. It took thousands and thousands of years for that soil to build itself, even in the desert. And I'm kind of an advocate against Burning Man, even though Burning Man has completely destroyed the Black Rock Desert as we know it, because they spend like 3 to 4 months, cleaning up all the oil and everything else that had leached into the dirt. And so there are canyons there that are like 5,000 or 6,000 years old that are also being destroyed because of the activity out there. These are really old, ancient places. And when I was a teenager, we used to hunt up there And we actually worked on getting legislation passed that you couldn't take ATVs in there. If you were going to hunt, you had to pack it in on your back and you had to pack it in out, because it was already starting to cause problems within those ecosystems. And then we got Burning Man, and it's been kind of, it's just trashed long term, forever, the whole area and the environment. But in the desert, we have soils that, a lot of these things, they'll come in and bulldoze whole huge areas, and then you watch everything vanish. You watch the rabbits vanish, and you watch the small birds vanish, and you watch all these things vanish, and people even think in the desert that nothing really lives there, but these animals, have learned to adapt, have learned from their parents what to eat, what to forage for, what to look for. And unlike animals, only the animals that have been hybrided will eat things that humans grow in large amounts, including us. We're more than happy to eat whatever they, make for us and that we can actually pick up in a grocery store. But at one point in time, we were also hunter-gatherers, where we had to gather from our environment. We ate from our environment. So anyway, go ahead and talk about your turn. I'll let you talk about what, some of those ideas running through your head.
Yeah, you gave me chills when you were talking about, the impact of our feet on the ground. I've followed a lot of indigenous teachings and attend Sweat Lodge fairly regularly. And I think that there's a lot of wisdom there in terms of, the original instructions for a human being, I think, from what I've been taught, are to walk as if each step is a blessing to the earth or a greeting to the earth. You want to put forth good things. Where I step, I want flowers to grow. I don't want where I step to disintegrate and erode away and become sand, like just sand that flows into dunes. I just finished reading the sci-fi classic Dune, and you talking about the impact of the people in the desert just brought a lot of that story right to the forefront of my mind. And those desert ecosystems are so fragile, and it's so important to retain the water and the soil in those places. When you have huge amounts of human impact, you can disrupt the roots of the plants that are holding the soil together. And when you start losing what holds the soil together, it just becomes shifting sand, and then there can be no life. So I think, this is one of those places where grassroots in the desert are the foundation of keeping things alive. They're moisture collecting. They sink the moisture down into the soil and make it available. They catch the dew in the morning. I'm a huge fan of grasses for that reason, because they're just these beautiful dew collectors. And one of our most under-recognized ecosystems and our most endangered ecosystem in this country is the prairie. We had 170 million acres stretching from the Gulf Coast up to Canada and then up through Canada. Canada still has a lot of it, but what happened in this country was, almost total obliteration. We're less than 1% now, and all of that diversity has been turned into wheat and corn and soy monocultures that are, sprayed with all kinds of herbicides and pesticides, and the runoff coming off of those is just horrible for the water, and it shows up in the Gulf. The Gulf is pretty sick. The Mississippi River is pretty sick, and it's the way we treat the land that affects the health of the water. And what we do to the water, we ultimately do to ourselves, because we drink the water. All our food has to have water to live. So one of my main missions is bringing back as much of that prairie, as much of that 170 million acres as we can get, because that was our Amazon rainforest. Plant diversity in remnant prairies that we've studied now, they're talking about 36 species per square foot. It's an incredible density of just plant species. It doesn't mention any insects. It doesn't mention the bison. It doesn't mention the prairie dogs and the people that lived off that land. And the way that land sunk water down and those deep grass roots helped water infiltrate deep into the soil. Those prairie grasses have a pretty average root depth of 10 feet, some up to 20 feet. And that really helps guide the water. The water doesn't necessarily know its way down into the soil, especially if it's thick, heavy clay, like what we have in Houston. So if the water falls on clay that's been compacted by bulldozers, it just kind of ponds on the top. It can't find its way into the groundwater without the help of those grass roots. So the grasses are this kind of keystone to me, that they sink the water down, they hold the soil together, they pull carbon from the atmosphere at a tremendous rate, faster than forests do, which is why I've recently become really, really interested in regenerative grazing, but that's a whole different conversation. I just want to, bring home this idea of grassroots, not just as a human movement, but as a natural movement. And, the beauty of those prairie grasses, the first time I saw 200 acres of restored tallgrass prairie in the fall, my jaw just dropped. It was just all these shades of red and orange and yellow, and 8 feet tall, just an ocean of grass, just like the original settlers described in their journals, this ocean of grass that a man on a horse could get lost in very, very easily, because there's just so much depth to it. And that's a lot of biomass. And when we're looking at grass, we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. Most of the biomass there is underground in the soil. And so when we're, that's kind of big picture scale, bringing it back into our yards, working in a suburban landscape or an urban landscape. A lot of people think of these native bunch grasses as weeds. They don't recognize them for what they are. They don't see the beauty in it. But if you want to see some beautiful grass, just Google yellow Indian grass or big blue stem or bushy blue stem. All of them are just stunning, their colors in the fall. It's like another wildflower season here in Texas when the fall comes around. I can't wait to see it. So you can bring the beauty of the prairie back into a suburban yard. And that also brings back a lot of function. It brings back some of that ability of the grass to sink water deep into the soil and prevent flooding that way. There's a Katy Prairie Conservancy north of Houston, and they've done a lot of work talking about how the prairie is like a sponge and how wetlands are like a sponge. And these root systems help hold the water and mitigate flooding. So in our suburban yards, if we bring back the prairie, we're going to see more butterflies, more birds, because they depend on the grass for shelter and for food in the form of seeds. And also, we're going to get a lot more water storage in our yards. The typical turf grass lawn has maybe 6 inches to a foot of root depth. So if you're a drop of water falling on a turf grass lawn and you follow that blade of grass down into the root zone, into the soil, follow along the roots, you're going to make it down about 6 inches, maybe a foot. But if that same drop of water fell on one of the tallgrass prairie grasses, like big blue stem, it could meander its way down the long stems, long leaves, down into the root zone, and then follow those roots 10 feet down and start recharging our groundwater. And that's a huge issue here in Texas. We've got these cycles of drought and flood. So we've got too much water, and then we've got not enough water. And when we pave areas, when we build homes, when we have roofs, we make that problem so much worse. The water just runs off. It sheet flows across the land and goes into the river, and then it heads to the Gulf of Mexico, and it's gone. What we want is to hold that water on the land for as long as possible, to slow it down, to spread it out, and to sink it into the soil so that the plants can use it to take care of the animals.
And then as the Yeah, and then so in the desert, we have some interesting stuff. Just wanted to go back to this is an awesome topic, by the way. There were grasses that were grown that the indigenous grasses were like up to 25 feet tall. I've been reading books about that, especially in America, and a lot of them were called buffalo grass just because the buffalo ate them. You know what I mean? So the buffalo would get in there and munch away. So this is why you would need like lots of, indigenous animals, because there was just such an abundance of plant life. And then you talk about like, golf grass, or, like grass that we would grow in our yards, which is like golf grass on golf courses. And, you have to treat that stuff because it's hybrid with like the worst chemicals ever. I think the worst chemicals that are actually end up in our water system are washed off of golf courses into the waterways and end up into like the natural, landscapes or rivers. So that kind of grass is like super bad in the desert. So one of the things that we have here is, I'm not in Reno right now. I'm in Oregon working on some other projects, but in Reno, and the area that I was in out in the desert, there was a huge dry lake bed, and we've had 30 years of drought. Well, they decided that, the drought was going to be permanently. So the city decided that it was going to run roads through there and actually build developments, in the dry lake bed. And then what happened was 3 years ago, all this water came and filled up the dry lake beds. And in some places, they actually had to use, fuel generator pumps and blockades, man-made blockades to keep the waters off the road so that the people could get to their houses. And some of the houses were completely flooded and damaged because
it's a nightmare. Water in your home.
Yeah, and this is what they're doing. They're all about, a lot of the government systems or how they deal with things are all about, how to divert, control, and destroy. And those are not good ways working with the earth when the earth has to go through its different fluxes. There's already systems that were established in order to manage all of this. And now we're having to go back and relearn so many things to actually try to regenerate some of these areas so that we don't lose a lot of the water. So one of the big, huge topics in this day and age is that fresh water is going to be more costly than gold. Well, there's a reason why, is because they're damaging all of the natural areas that would have taken the excess flood water and filtered it through all of the little root systems. And then once that was saturated down, then it would drop it back down into the aquifers. But because these people are diverting the water, controlling it, and building where they shouldn't be building, then now they're diverting all the water, which is making us have less and less and less water. And our aquifer should be full. At some point in time in your area, you're going to get a large amount of water. And if you have the areas that can manage that water, then it will restore and purify the water into the aquifer so that you don't have to worry about that anymore. I mean, it's there's cycles that happen. And then also too, the other thing too is like, in biodynamics, we studied a lot of Victor Schallenberger, and he did a lot of stuff on soil and water. And what his study showed was that if you don't have the proper soil, you don't have the proper microbes in the dirt, that they don't communicate with the water, right? So that's basically the water doesn't come really to that area, and you start to have more and more drought, which causes more and more problems with everything dying, and then just having sand that isn't going to be able to restore itself. So I mean, there's a lot of things that go along with the soil, the plants, and the water, and how it all has a relationship. And in some cases that we are just really on the front line of actually being able to wrap our minds around it and understand it.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought up the aquifer recharge issue and then the engineering issue, in terms of the paradigm that designed our stormwater infrastructure was very much an ideology of, let's get this water off of this land as quickly as we possibly can and send it downstream so we don't flood these homes. Well, what happens if you're the home farthest downstream? You're going to get flooded if people have built uphill from you recently. And that happened to a lot of people in Houston. And the reason my family's home in Houston didn't flood was because they put in drains in the backyard to replace the wetland that was destroyed. That wetland sponge got turned into basically just a toilet drain, so that every little bit of oil drippings and yard chemical or, dog poop, metal shavings, all of that went straight down that drain, out into the bayous, out into the main water body, polluting that main water body. There's this ridiculous saying that says the solution to pollution is dilution. And I just think that's absurd. If I take a bottle of water and put 3 drops of oil in it, and then pour that bottle of water into another bottle of water halfway, and then fill that one up, and then do that several times, are you going to want to drink that knowing that there were 3 drops of oil in the original bottle of water? No, probably not. So, my paradigm is kind of, if you don't want to drink it, don't put it on the land. If you don't want to drink it, think about where it's going to go. All these things end up in the water. Trash is just the most visible symptom of the way we're poisoning our water. And it's just, you see these videos of the ocean trash, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. Most of that plastic that's in there is microns big. It's not visible with the naked eye. It's broken into tiny, tiny pieces, and then it gets in the food chain, and then we end up eating it. We poison ourselves. What we do to the water, we do to ourselves. That's a fundamental teaching. So I'm really glad that you brought up the aquifer recharge thing, because we can have this tremendously positive impact. We can be putting water back into our aquifers. I like to call it our water bank account. We're here in the hill country of Texas. We're on the Edwards Aquifer and the Trinity Aquifer. And there are recharge features in this karst on the place I'm at right now. There's holes where the water can go back into the aquifer. When the water goes back in there, we want it as clean as possible so that when we drink it, it comes out clean. We don't want to be putting gasoline in those holes. We don't want to be putting oil in those holes, because eventually that water is going to come out in our well, and we will drink it, and we will be poisoned if we poison the land. So it's this regenerative mindset of every footstep, every action, we want to have a positive impact. So these limestone hills in the hill country are kind of like giant limestone cisterns. Cisterns are, one of those big rain tanks. And we can catch the water and we can put it in those cisterns. But right now, we're just letting the water run off our roofs and go downstream and flood our neighbors. That's not being good to our neighbor, one, and it's not being good to ourselves either. So it really doesn't make any sense at all, the way we've arranged things. So we need to shift our paradigm to this idea of we can put water in our water bank account. We can have income. Right now, Central Texas, we are drawing out of that aquifer like crazy. It's the middle of the summer. It's hot. It's dry. We're just sucking out that water. And anytime you have a bank account where you have more money going out than you have coming in, you're in really scary, dangerous territory. And depending on the size of your bank account, it might take a long time for you to notice that you're in dangerous territory. But if you have a small bank account, you're going to start to notice pretty quick that you're in a scary place. And that's with money. And, we have a system that's set up around that. But when that's water, when we're not putting water back in our water bank account and we're just taking water out of our water bank account, that is the scariest situation to me, because it means that we're in danger of becoming a desert. And deserts are beautiful and wonderful, and I like deserts. I like to go out to Big Bend. I like to visit there. But this part of the hill country where I live right now is this amazing place with crystal clear water that flows out from under the roots of these giant cypress trees. And I like sitting in the river that's 72 degrees when it's 100 degrees out. That's a beautiful thing. And I want that river to keep flowing. So it comes down to, how do we treat the land better so that we can continue to have our rivers flow, so we can continue to drink water from our wells and not dry up. You know, this part of Texas is lush, and I see people doing a lot of xeriscaping here, and I love the concept of xeriscaping, you know, landscaping that's dry, that doesn't require extra water inputs. But so often right now, the trend I'm seeing is people putting down black rocks and white rocks and rocks of all different colors. And rocks have a beautiful, lovely texture. But when it's 105 degrees outside and it's 3 p.m, if you put your hand on those rocks, you're not going to be able to hold your hand there for more than 5 seconds without it starting to burn. Imagine what's going on with the plants that are trying to grow there and the soil. The rocks are kind of actually shielding the soil from some of that heat. It's better than having bare soil, because that gets cooked really fast and really easy. But I am appalled that the general this supposedly eco way to landscape in Central Texas, the supposedly sustainable way to landscape in Central Texas, is to put out all these rocks everywhere and plant desert plants that are from the Big Bend region. That's an 8-hour drive away from here. That's not this place. This place is lush. This place has lots and lots of water and vegetation that's green and leafy and flowering. And there's lots of beautiful flowering plants in the desert too, don't get me wrong, but I don't think we should be trying to create a desert in Austin, Texas. I don't think we should be trying to create a desert in San Antonio, Texas. I think we should be trying to keep our land as lush and moist as possible for as long as we can. I want to fight back against the Chihuahuan Desert. I don't want it to come up here. I want to still be able to have well water. I have nothing against deserts except for the idea of men creating one.
Well, and this is the thing, like in Reno or those areas, every periodically people will come and have me look at their landscaping, or, come in and try to help their community garden or whatever, Buddhist centers or whatever else. And I'm always like appalled, because they will plant trees, and I'm more edible. Like if I'm going to do a landscape, I want to have as much edible food as possible, just because the animals, people, but I want them to be kind of more location oriented, right? I don't want to like transport, a tree from Wisconsin and plant it, in Reno. But one of the things that appalls me over and over again is that they will have landscaping companies come in and develop their property, and they'll have, like, say, trees that you would find in Japan. I'm just going to talk about the Buddhist center, but they have these, blooming, trees from Japan that are found at a lot of the Buddhist centers in Japan. And so they try to bring them to Reno. And then in this case, they planted them all along the road, between the sidewalk and the little piece of dirt before the road. And then they decided to put rocks all the way around them. And they are totally 100% scorched.
Oh, those poor trees.
Yeah, and they asked me what I thought that they should do with them. And I said, well, you really need to actually take them out of the ground. I mean, because they're suffering pretty bad, because the whole outside is totally scorched open, right? There's nothing, the whole part of the straw part of the tree, the cabria part, is completely burned off, down to its core. And so the trees are still living barely, but, and they do bloom, but then they have all these big, bug dens, that have been building from the inside onto the top, and all kinds of stuff. But, you see that a lot here. And then, with their desert landscaping, they're going to put some kind of cover over the natural dirt when they take everything out, and then plant things in between this natural, or this cover that keeps the weeds and everything else out. And then they're going to put more rocks on top of that. And then, you think about your air conditioning bill in the summertime, because now your whole house has this mirror reflection, because all of those rocks have some degree of crystals or silica or stuff in them. And so they amplify the heat. So it's going to make your house and your property like way hotter. And then the water doesn't absorb through those linings, where it would have been a lot better if you would have if you didn't like your landscaping that you had, that you could have had them come in, and upgrade your soil and plant a whole bunch of amazing grasses, like, all these grasses that you're talking about, because you could build a fence with the grass. So the grass grows in the summertime. That's when you're outside and you've got 15-foot, 25-foot grass, in these areas in your front yard and around your property, and you can actually create a fence line. So the time that you are spending a lot of time in your yard, you've got these tall grasses growing and no one can see you, and then the winter time you just cut them down, and then, maybe find somebody in the area that wants to mulch it, or get a compost going, with your neighbors, a non-smelly one, like a biodynamic one, and mulch it back into the system, that it can be used. So so I think about the same things, except for you're like in lush and I'm like in desert, and I think, like, this is not helping at all. So talking about, like, and I'm not, pointing the finger at the government or at landscaping companies or whatever else, but everybody's kind of doing business the same way, instead of starting to think out of the box and say, what else could I offer? And that's the other thing too, is the people that are getting this work done, they always want to go for the cheapest landscaping, or the government wants to go through, how do we, deal with this flood area, instead of waiting 10 years to rehabilitate it and grow it. What's the fastest, cheapest way that we can do this? I don't think it's cheaper to put in concrete drains to divert the water, but I think they feel like they have to do a quick fix, and they don't want to really hire the people necessary that may have the information to actually do a longer term plan, something longer than we are. And you were talking about the native way, and I've had a lot of amazing teachers, and recently I just learned that I've practiced the 7 generations, playing it forward for the next 7 generations. And recently I was talking to a friend of mine who's going to be on the show. She's native, and she said, do you know that it's each generation's 500 years? So when we talk about, moving things forward 7 generations, we're talking 3,500 years in the future. Because see, back in the old days, a person would live for 500 years, right? 200 years. So that's why it would be 35 years. So 7 generations into the future is 3,500 years. So it makes you think a lot more about, my short time on this earth, and what I'm really paying it forward with my life, to make sure that in the next 3,500 years that this place is beautiful, this place is being restored. It makes it more important. It makes the work like so much like more important than what you're doing, and what you're studying. And sometimes these paths, you have to do a lot of work for free in order to get people to understand what you're doing, or allow people to work on different projects so people can see things that you're doing, that you're trying to do the best that you can for the long-term life of Earth and the people on Earth and all of the beautiful things that live on this Earth, kind of a thing. So I was going to say something else, that there was something else that came along through that. But yeah, the whole, idea of what we're doing with our water, that it's unnecessary, and all these other things that are happening, when we could do so many other amazing things that actually help. And the earth is strong. I mean, natural law is strong, and it can bounce back, but we have to give it a little help to bounce it back. And I was just going to mention, like, native plants too, is this year, through somebody who I've had on my show, Greg. I call him the sacred seed guy, but he, in the 70s, he's white, and he was given the knowledge and the information and the seeds from a native man who had been having these seeds and been taking care of these seeds. And so now he does the huge outgrows on his property, and he brings the native old ancient seeds back, and he returns them back to the native people and then shares them everywhere. And so this year, yeah. So this winter I'm going to go for 2 weeks, and I'm going to be hanging out with a lot of these people because I want to start growing outgrows of native seeds next year. That's like my major big thing that I'm going to be doing. And I did an experiment garden where I was in the desert, and the difference between the native seeds, the corn, even he sent me some stuff from India. I had some seeds, native. I had cardamom. I had some holy basil, and also some popping sorghum. And then he sent me some like Navajo corn and like 8 varieties of native beans and Hopi sunflowers and stuff. But the thing that was just so amazing about the whole thing is the native seeds, man, once they hit the dirt, they were like, bam, and they were like growing strong. And just, you know, no matter what happened, we had these crazy weird hailstorms and windstorms, and then we had these massive fires for like 2 months. You couldn't even see across the road. And no matter what was thrown at these native seeds, they just grew, you know, and they just grew so lavishly. It blew my mind. And then I had these heirloom seeds, and, you know, I had some heirloom seeds of spinach and different kinds of lettuces and all kinds of different stuff, which I grew on the other half, and they like barely grew through all this stuff that happened with the environment this summer in the desert. And it was like, this is where we really have to head. We have to head back to the native seeds. You know, people ate grasses. I mean, they're going back and they're restudying the Paleolithic period. There were people that said that, you know, people ate a lot of meat during that time frame, but they're starting to realize they didn't, that they actually ate grasses, because in the bodies of the you know, the mummified people or bones that they found, the teeth, it's grass. Right. And so that their teeth were actually grinded down by all these grasses that they ate. So humans, you know, early on life on this planet as hunter-gatherers ate a lot of grass, you know, and this is where a lot of the nutrient is, like silica. You don't really, it's really difficult to get silica in your body, and it's the fountain of youth mineral, right? It comes from grass. So the only way that you can actually get it from your diet is if you're eating like, you know, grass-fed beef or grass-fed buffalo, you know, that has an annual cycle of grasses that it's eating and diversity of grasses. So as we're losing a lot of nutrient because we're not eating the native natural things, you know, that we could actually grow in our yard. And, you know, instead of getting wheatgrass in a container and growing it, you could actually grow a whole bunch of diverse grasses that mammals can eat in your backyard and go and hack them down and then run them through your grinder and juice it.
Exactly.
That would be much better for you.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because it brings to mind one of my favorite grasses right now is called Eastern Gamma Grass, and it is the queen of the prairie. It is ice cream grass. Cattle love it. Bison love it. And it's a really close relative of corn. This is a perennial form of corn that's super deep rooted, you know, roots going down 10 feet deep. And it just, that makes it so drought hardy, and it's so prolific. This is corn that you can plant one time and it'll be there for you for 20 years. You're not going to have to sow. You're not going to have to till. It'll just keep coming up. And we can eat it in the same way as corn. The kernels can be popped like popcorn. Wow. They can be steamed. And I'm still working on figuring out exactly when to harvest it and how to prepare it. But that knowledge was passed to me that it could be eaten. And that just blew my mind wide open to, you know, we talk about foraging possibilities. Like, I can make a landscape that's completely edible and also completely native species and perennial species too. It's not going to be plant species that you would recognize at a grocery store. You would never find these at a grocery store, but if you know who these plants are, they will be there for you in time of need. One of my other favorites here for Central Texas is
Hold
called
on one
Turk's
sec.
Cap.
Go
Yeah.
back to that. Tell me what the name of that grass was again. The perennial corn grass.
It's called Eastern Gamma Grass, and it's also really great for flood control and building soil. It's my queen. You know, that's a spirit plant.
So hey,
me.
just to throw out there, and then
wonderful.
you can go on to the next one. But is there a place where you can buy the seeds? Is there a place that you can find the seeds? Say that you're interested in getting some of these grasses and growing them.
Sure. There's a Native American seed out of Junction, Texas, and they're real good people. But my experience with growing it from seed hasn't been great. You know, a handful of seed costs like $9, and from that handful, I got like 6 plants, and a handful had like, you know, maybe 100 seeds in it. So I think a bird is supposed to eat it or something. It needs to be scarified. I'm not sure what the process is, but really the best way to get Eastern Gamma Grass is to propagate it from live roots. So you break off one root and essentially, you know, make a copy and spread it that way, which is how it spread when the bison roamed the land. They would come along and cut it up and spread it that way with their hooves and drag it along.
Well, I just seen, you know, ancient, you know, Chinese people bent over with, you know, how they plant rice. Mm-hmm. You know, so you'd have an area that have a lot of water, and then you go in through and you transplant your grass, and then, you know, then you leave it, right? So you can take it from one area, put it to another, like when you're coming in for the rainy season. And then it would actually take hold and grow. Yeah. I mean,
and that brings me right back around. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's our job. You know, that's what we're supposed to be doing. We're not supposed to be making money, you know, in this corporate doing nothing virtual reality. Because, I mean, I think that there are some aspects about virtual reality, but I mean, until you get out and actually man a shovel, you know, you don't really know anything about what's going on. Once you man a shovel, you stick your hands in the dirt, and because it has codes. That's the one thing I'm learning about the native seeds is that they have codes, you know, like people want to talk about, you know, new age stuff and all these things are encoded and Taurus fields and all this other stuff. Well, none of the new plants have the codes. So when you start planting, you know, like native seeds, like the corn, and I'll just tell you, like from my experience, what happened with the corn. So when I got the corn in the mail, it was being sent to me. I woke up in the middle of the night and I could hear, you know, the ancestors singing, you know, like they were totally like drumming, and there was women and men, and, you know, I don't know exactly what song they were singing, but it woke me up. Right. And then I realized like the seeds were on their way. They were in the mail. Right. So they were like being activated, coming to me. And then whatever I was going to do with the seeds, they were going to travel out. They were going to be grown there. And so as soon as I started planting the corn in particular, the corn had all of these codes and stuff in it. And so it actually was under the ground, and it made a few people where I was living totally nuts. I mean, they went so far off the hinge, fighting with each other over like totally petty stuff. And it was interesting because it had to bring up, it was like the corn, while it was underneath, was bringing up all the stuff that was hidden in us within the direct vicinity. It was a trip.
I think that's so fascinating because, you know, especially when we're talking about grassroots, it's the things that we can't see that matter. You know, the grass can be completely removed at the top, and as long as the roots are still there, it'll grow back because it evolved with bison as its brother coming through and grazing it down to nothing. And then it would, after the bison would leave, it would shoot back up and grow tall again.
Right.
It can't handle continuous mowing like we do in our yards, but I think, you know, what you're talking about spreading the seed and bringing these plants back is totally in line with what I'm doing. I have my own little nursery of plants that I propagate. I build a rain garden and I put an Eastern Gamma Grass in there. And as I'm maintaining that rain garden, that Eastern Gamma Grass starts to spread out and get so huge that it overwhelms the space. So I'm required by, you know, the homeowner's sense of aesthetics to start, you know, chopping off little bits. And then I take those to my nursery and I grow them. And guess what? They're going to go to another rain garden. And that mama plant that's in that first rain garden is going to have, you know, thousands of offspring spread throughout the landscape in the rain gardens I do.
Yeah,
And
no,
we
I think
have
that's,
those
I think that's, yeah, the relationships, you know, and it goes back to, yeah. So we have just a couple of minutes before we go to commercial. But yeah, so, you know, when the Native people, you know, talk about all my relations, you know, this is it, you know, how things move around. Yeah, and how they travel around, and the relationships that they're building, and the relationships that they build with animals and their environment and all these other things. And we have to learn how to participate in that. You know, we have to learn how to be stewards of that, you know, in a good way. You know,
yes, in a good way.
Yeah, in a good way, walking in balance, and making sure that the grasses who are our sisters, our brothers, our mothers, and in some cases our teachers, and how, you know, and how to take care of them, and give them what they need, or even, like for me, transport them. They get transported to Reno. And I'll tell you this really quick thing, and then we're going to go to break for like 4 minutes. But so I didn't really know I had to leave Reno. I'm gone for a month, and somebody needs to harvest the corn. And so I just basically said, okay, well, corn, you've got to like find somebody. Well, this Seneca woman started coming to the property, and she's going to build a new lodge and stuff in the area. And I said, hey, would you like to use sacred corn? And she said, well, yeah. And I said, well, great. You can harvest it and take it to the next place that it needs to be. But it's amazing how it managed itself, and it found somebody to help it. All right, we're going to go to commercial. We'll see you back in about 4 minutes.
All right, see you in a sec.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
This is Barbara DeLong, host of Nightlight Radio, inviting you to join me on a cosmic journey, exploring a metaphysical montage of spiritual material, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between, including spiritual readings for those who seek enlightenment. Let Nightlight provide you with equal measure of light, love and laughter, insight, wisdom, and inspiration. Monday nights, 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on Studio B, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hey, everybody, carrying stones and digging holes. Your host, Bridgette Lyn Dolgoff. Anyway, today we got a guest, so we went out to Texas, and we're talking to Shannon Brown. She has a Facebook presence. You can find her at Ecosystems Regeneration Artisans. And we are kind of having a broad discussion. A lot of it has to do with water, flood mitigation, native plants, and rain gardens. And all of this stuff can be, just for people out there, a lot of this stuff can be, small. It can be done, I know from the work that I do in urban farming, it can be done on a really, really small scale, or it can be done on a really large scale. And so, Shannon, are you with me still?
Yeah, I'm right.
All right. And also, too, I just want to say, Shannon, I'm just really impressed by you. So I'm just really proud that we have our younger generations are starting to pick up work that the generations above them kind of lost their way a little bit. And so hopefully it'll help for us to find our way back, working with the planet and the earth and all these amazing plants before we actually lose them. So I just wanted to add this. This was a research from quite a bit ago. I think I read in one of those science journals, 10 years ago. But there was a university professor who had been working on trying to change the genetics of sheetgrass. And so, they kept modifying it in their, labs and greenhouses into all kinds of different aspects, because sheetgrass is basically taken over. I don't know about anywhere else, but it's taken over the West Coast, and it's really created a lot more severe fire danger. But, this is the thing. We wouldn't have fire danger if we had, mitigated flood areas, right? And we probably wouldn't have the fire danger if humans didn't live in areas where they could potentially lose their house. So there wouldn't be a fire danger. And in the old ways, in the West Coast, when people would move their cattle, they would actually burn, they would actually torch and burn areas behind them when they left. So that it would grow back, and it would have, nutrient and whatever else. So when they came back the following year, it would grow, the grasslands would, grow back up. So it's just humans that are in the way of the natural processes of fire and flood and all these other things. The landscape developed over thousands and thousands of years to be able to handle it, right? Adapted to it. The drought and too much water and too little water until we came along and tried to control it. But so they did this sheetgrass project for 20 years, trying to figure out what they could inject in the DNA of sheetgrass so that they could, plant it out, and then eventually it would change all of the other sheetgrass. And what happened was this actually basically happened overnight. The scientists, they went in after, 20 years of mutiny to the sheetgrass. They went in, and what they discovered was that the sheetgrass had changed. And so they looked at it under the microscope and everything else. And this was overnight. And what they found was that the sheetgrass had changed itself back to exactly what it was genetically before they started messing with it.
Oh, that's so interesting.
And so these plants, if they're in the settings that they need to be in, and they're taken care of in the way that they need to be taken care of, they can actually go back to their original DNA code, and they can actually adjust and adapt themselves as needed, entirely without our help.
Well, I'm not sure about entirely without our help. I've kind of come around to believing that, humans, the way we live now, is very disconnected and damaging. It's a kind of an abusive relationship to nature. I'll remove the kind of, I shouldn't soften it. It's an abusive relationship to nature right now. But we can have a nurturing, mutually loving relationship. That was our original role in this garden, was to be tenders of this ecosystem, to work with the animals and listen to the ebb and flow of the land, and set a fire when it needed to be set, or dig a hole when it needed to be set, or collect seeds and spread them to a new place. I think we can have this tremendously positive impact. And so often we get this jaded and cynical view based on the way humans have been living just for the past 150 years. And it's just that blink of an eye, and only in this one country, and a few other, in the West and a few other countries, and it's spreading like a mind virus. But we've lived in a very different way from this for how many thousands of years, and it's been a beautiful relationship and a loving relationship. So I think we need to learn how to stop being toxic and stop creating toxic spaces. So, on the topic of not creating toxic spaces, on nurturing spaces that are beneficial for us and beneficial for the wildlife around us and the plants around us, the plants that support us, the plants that support the wildlife, the water, the plants that help the water recharge into the aquifer. I love that your podcast or your radio show is titled Carrying Stones and Digging Holes, because that's what it takes, is digging holes. We're talking today about rain gardens, and we've danced all around and talked about grass, which is such a fundamental aspect of this. And it's been a beautiful conversation, but focusing on that idea of digging a hole, digging a basin to catch and hold the water, just dig a space for the rain to sit and settle into the land and sink down and recharge the land. Like following the work of Brad Lancaster, who fought the engineers and the city planners and made those curb cuts so that the stormwater wouldn't just run across the concrete and go away. It would flow into the basins to nurture the trees and transform a lifeless xeroscape, as I like to call it, zero with a Z-E-R-O, big old goose egg without a goose egg, and transform that into this space that's full of life and is lush and has fruit and birds and butterflies. And we think about what do you want your desired future to be like? What do you want to see when you look out your window? Do you want to see concrete and nothing? And maybe the occasional, sparrow? Or do you want to see all kinds of different birds, all kinds of different butterflies, all kinds of plants blooming at different times of the year? You get a new flower every week. That's a beautiful thing. And we can absolutely create those spaces that nurture that. And that's why I founded this landscape company, is because we need better care of our land. We need to get away from the business as usual, slap down some plastic, cover up the weeds, and plant some stuff on top of it and disconnect that little piece of garden from the water table. That's, to me, so ridiculous and so damaging. We're spending, I don't know how much money to damage the land so deeply. Why would we do that when we could spend less money even, to do it cheaper and do it better by digging a hole, placing some stones, and letting that water sink into the land to create a rain garden. I'm so excited that this is becoming a thing here in Central Texas, because we have this huge flash flood problem. We're in Flash Flood Alley. We get some of the worst flash floods in the entire world, second to a place in Siberia that no one lives. And it's dangerous. People's cars get swept off the road and they drown, and it's a terrible thing. And we can only build so many large detention ponds. At a certain point, it comes down to each individual roof, each individual yard should capture its own runoff and sink that into the soil so that we can have soil moisture to feed the plants. If you look at NASA's data maps, they have this thing called SMAP, S-M-A-P, and it's a soil moisture map. And if you look at the maps of the soil moisture drop from the 1980s, I think it is, until now, it's just heartbreaking, because everything's turning red. We're losing the soil moisture. And that's what that's what allows plants to grow. That's what allows life to happen. Life comes from water and soil. So rain gardens are about capturing that water and making the soil more moist so that you can have this explosive growth. And one of the rain gardens I put in this spring, it's astonished me because I've had to cut it back already. It looks like a garden that, is 2 or 3 seasons in, and it's gone through half a season, and it's the hard, hot summer season. So it's amazing what happens when you keep the water on the land. And that's this whole concept behind green infrastructure is a term for it, or I don't really like the term, but it's low impact development. That's the term that governments will use when they're talking about flood mitigation and things like that. And cities and governments here in Texas are really starting to pay attention to that because the flooding is so dangerous, especially with what happened in Harvey. And it's totally preventable. This is one of those where an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Just fix the water system and we'll all be so much better off. We'll have water in the aquifer to continue to drink. We won't have cars washing off the roads. We won't have homes flooding nearly as much. It's not that it won't happen, but it won't happen nearly as much. It's just been escalating and getting worse and worse, especially as more and more people flood into these areas and pave them over and make these impervious surfaces that the water has no choice but to run off and go away. The water doesn't want to run off. The water wants to stay in the soil. And when you increase the organic matter in the soil, you get a tremendous increase in water storage capacity. I talked a little bit earlier about standing on a cistern. Our hills are like cisterns. Our soil is like a cistern. I don't know if many people can imagine a 20,000 gallon cistern. I've only recently wrapped my head around that size, but it's a very large cistern. And for every acre of land, if you increase the soil organic carbon by just 1%, and you can increase it by 5, 6, 7, 8%, just 1 percentage point increase in soil organic carbon, you get a 20,000 gallon capacity of water storage per acre. So if you have some degraded soil in Texas that say has a 1% soil organic carbon because it's been overgrazed by cattle in a continuous setting for a really long time, it's drying up. The rancher's going broke because his cows can't get enough to eat because the grass is all degraded and it's going to prickly pear, cactus, and it's hard times. If he can change his management practices so that he starts getting more organic matter into his soil, if we start at 1% and we can get to 5% for every acre, that would be 20,000 times 4 percentage point increase. That's 80,000 gallons of water per acre stored in that soil. That's amazing. Soil is a huge sponge, and that sponge feeds our rivers and creeks and our aquifers slowly over time. So the real problem is with runoff. We don't want the water to run off. Keep it and hold it on the land. Keep it right here and let it sink down and do its job. And it'll eventually get to the rivers. It'll just get there really slowly, filtered through the soil, and it'll come out crystal clear and gorgeous. Not like what you see when we have a flash flood and you go down to the river and all of a sudden what went from being crystal clear water where you can see your feet and you're 6 feet of water is all suddenly murky and brown from all the runoff coming off of the roads and the lawns and the rooftops. It's an incredible thing to see that transformation in the water when it rains. The rain is washing the land clean, but the rivers take the brunt of that, and whatever water goes into the aquifer from that also is contaminated. And it's just a tragic situation. We have the city of San Antonio, which has the San Antonio River running through it. And the San Antonio River Authority has been doing wonderful things, promoting green infrastructure and leading the way in terms of showing what rain gardens can look like. If you want to see videos of how to do a rain garden or learn more information, I highly recommend the San Antonio River Authority's website. These are the people that taught me how to do this. They're wonderful people. But the San Antonio River, like the San Marcos River or like Barton Springs, is spring-fed. When the indigenous people that originally lived here were here, that river ran crystal clear. The San Marcos River is still crystal clear coming out of the springs. Barton Springs in Austin, crystal clear. Gorgeous, cool spring water. That's fossil water. It's old water. That's not new water. The new water that's going in is dirty and it's brown. And when it comes out, it's going to be a sad thing.
So tell me.
Hold on one second.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
The San Antonio River right now runs brown all the time when it goes through the city. And it's tragic. It's heartbreaking to know that that river was crystal clear. And then based on the way we treated the land, we've turned that river muddy and brown. And we can fix it. So
we can totally fix it. Okay, so what was it that you said that they have the rain garden videos, San Antonio something?
Yeah, the San Antonio River Authority.
Okay.
And they're a government organization, but they're pushing a lot of the right kind of mindset. We're on the same page in a lot of ways. We're speaking different languages. It's been very interesting being on this journey of like studying permaculture and walking in that world, and then also working in the government realm where we use completely different terms for these things, but we're really talking about the exact same thing, the exact same strategies. And we all want the same thing, which is to have clean, clear water and plenty of it for generations to come.
Yeah. So I just like to write down these when people, start spouting off with all these different, oh, you should go over here and look at this, or you should look at this person's book. So I try to write this stuff down so that I can go look at it, because I'm super interested, because Shannon is going to be my new best friend, I can tell.
Yay. Yes, we're going to have to trade some seeds.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be coming that way probably in around Christmas time for some native seed work. So I have to, so I may just drop in and say, hey, what's going on over here? Let's see, let's look at it. I brought my shovel. What can I help you with today?
Well, we can build a rain garden. We can do it in half a day.
Yeah. So, okay. So there was I just want to talk about carbon for carbon. One of the sidelines that we deal with in biodynamic farming is the carbon for carbon. So you have negative carbon and then you have positive carbon, and positive carbon can knock down negative carbon. So in biodynamic farming, we build, you don't really have a farm. We call it a whole organism, right? Because it functions all together, the animals and everything, jam together. And then we make the preparations that we spray onto the land to actually help to regenerate the soil and bring microbial mass into it. So
wonderful.
That's
the magic right there.
Yeah. So one of the things that I, and now for the last, 5 years, I actually travel around and I teach people how to make biodynamically inspired compost, especially if you don't have the sprays or you don't have a farm contact that you can buy the sprays, because a lot of the stuff's put in the ground for like a year, it's cured, and then it's brought up and then it's used for sprays and different things on the land. But if you're not close to a biodynamic farm, one of the things I've been doing is I've been redesigning the compost. I mean, biodynamic composts are phenomenal anyway, but I've been redesigning them with add different things into them from the different environments within the environment where these composts are being made. And then I also utilize a large amount of mushrooms in it as the breaking down happens. So it turns into this major mycelium mass. It's like black marshmallow. And then I use that to either put into different places. I teach people how to do this on their land so that they can start restorating their soil, first using this stuff in their food areas and getting the dirt up and going. And then and all the stuff, the components are from their environment. So I've been building this whole idea and then being able to spray it. And then you're literally spraying mycelium mass, or microbial mass from that you've created over a few months into your own land. And then it helps everything to grow faster. And it helps all the components to get into the soil, so it's, instead of waiting, 15 years to rehabilitate it, now we're like at 1 year, like kind of like what you're talking about. Instead of it looks like a 3-year rain garden, but it's only like, half a year old,
Yeah, absolutely.
How to do these things in a good way. Yeah, not doing it in a fake way or with chemicals, but to do it in a good way by learning how to work with the environment that you have and utilizing all of the components, because I deal with a lot of people who are kind of preppers, and they need to know what they can collect in their environments to make these compost, right, in order to put in there, so that they have kind of all the data and information from the whole area included, and different plants and different, dry carbon and everything else. Then they can do it from their own land. There's nothing that they have to go get, and there's nothing that they have to go buy. It's all inclusive. All the information you need to create medicine, fix your soil, fix your environment is already in your environment. Your environment already has that information. It's just collecting it and being able to put it into like a compost matter where it all breaks down and it turns into one hard drive. So all the information and data comes together. And then you're conjuring those microbes from deep within the dirt because they've left the top and they've gone way down, and they're just waiting for something good to happen so that they can, reemerge into your compost, and you create, good loveliness for them. So
nature is waiting for us to bring it back. Well, we don't even have to do anything to bring it back. We just have to get out of its way and help it along a little bit.
But anyway, so that's stuff that I think about at night. And it's one of the reasons why I'm in Oregon for 30 days too, is to kind of work on some more of these processes because I kind of live out of my car. I don't really have a set place that I live, because of a lot of the work that I'm doing doesn't really pay. So, but I'm, passionate. So I have to when people ask me to come to their land and do different things, then I get an opportunity to actually put into practice some of the things that I think about at night, I'm conjuring into this reality kind of a thing. One more thing on the carbon for carbon.
Living in the van life.
Yeah. And it's been since 2006. So it is what it is. And you learn how to live with less. So you have more opportunity in your life to, work on, doing your own research and building your own theories and developing your own work and your own medicines and seeing how that plays out, because there's a lot less other stuff that's going on. I call the need starts to vanish, the need to pay your rent, the need to, what you're eating, like
you don't unplug from the matrix.
Yeah. So you just kind of, you have less need. And I think then you're less of a taker and you can actually be in the giving. Right. And it's just a journey, I think. But anyway, it's tough. It's not easy to live in a van by any means.
I've definitely done that. I have a prior piece of work that I did called Oakley Explorations Road Trip, operating under the pen name of Shannon Oakley, where I was traveling around the country and observing nature and learning from it directly, because the teachings I received in school from ecology professors and textbooks, I found were kind of lacking. You can only learn so much about nature from sitting up in a tower and inside reading a book. It takes observation, and it takes experience, and it takes listening to the people that have been on the land for a long time and using your powers of perception to see what's happening. Where is the healthiest area here, and what's going on in the soil in that healthy area? What's going on with the mycorrhizal fungi. Before we get too far off the mushroom topic, I want to bring up some great friends of mine who are doing wonderful work up in Austin. I'd love to take you to their site. It's called Circle Acres, and it's an old brownfield site. The organization is called Myco Alliance. Daniel Reyes and Katie Avery are doing fantastic work. learning how to use fungi to break down the really nasty stuff from oil spills and toxic landfill sites. And they're just incredible people. So I just wanted to, shout out to Myco Alliance real quick, because they are the people that know those little beings very well.
How do you spell that? Myco Alliance?
MYCO.
Okay, Myco Alliance. Okay, hey, and also too, if you know people who you think would be great for the show, just tell them to message me, and I'd like to get them on. I don't have dates left until like November, but it's good to get on and know what you're going to talk about. You know what I mean? Get on the schedule. So always like new people. I love like this Myco Alliance and what they're doing. I would totally love to talk to them. I'd just be, these are the people that I want on the show, or people that are doing work that nobody knows about.
Yeah. And we need help getting the word out there that we're doing this, because it's a constant struggle for me to find the right people that want me to do the work that I do. I'm sure you have the same thing. It's looking for the right opportunities and the right kinds of people.
Right. No, it's super exciting. It's super exciting to find more people like myself out there. Like, whoa, hey! Yeehaw. All right. So one thing I want to talk about, and then I'll let you go ahead and finish until probably about 56 till, and then that'll be the end of the show. So we'll just run it through there. But one of the things in biodynamics, we talk about carbon for carbon and how we build our, you don't really have a farm until it's like 50 years old, because it has to run through three seed processes, where you're growing the seed, save the seed, grow the seed, save the seed, and then plant the seed, because then the seed is like kind of adapted to your land. This is the philosophy. And animals, if you bring an animal there, it's got to have babies several times before their babies are really comfortable there, right? That they like everything that is about that land. And then the carbon for carbon. So we have these ideas and philosophies of how we create the outside areas around the farms, to input positive carbon so that it's easier inside the farm, right? So it's just this one giant positive carbon, imprinter that's just, sending out like tons of positive carbon for miles around in its environment. So I always thought, like, if we were going to do proper communities, right? And say somebody wanted to build, he was going to, take apart the land, and he wanted to build a 20, story high rise, then whatever the mathematical equation comes out to be, the four corners around it would have to be able to buffer the negative carbon coming from that building. So there'd be four parcels, north, west, south, east, and then the roads going through it that would be growing positive carbon, which also could be plants, creating habitat for the animals that are being displaced, and then also being able to use the positive carbon to take down the negative carbon and consume it. And so I always thought, like, if we develop things like that, and the person that was building the, 20 level floor was also responsible for the area around it, because it had to be able to knock down the carbon annually that the building was producing. Plus, think about how beautiful the environments would be. You look outside your window and you've got like these big parcels. They're just gorgeous, and you have trees that grow in them. And then also it would help with the flooding. It would help with mitigation of flooding, and how much less water would go down the drain. And then people would have food, plant medicines, this is like a utopia world that I'm talking about. But you could have, you could have people who, take care and manage of these parcels around buildings and in developments, and teach people how to use the plant medicines and what is edible. And, it could be a whole education. That way, if you lived in a 20-acre high-rise, but you lived in a 20, tower high-rise, your kids would have these beautiful areas to go and actually, contemplate and touch things and smell things and hang out.
Right, and have butterflies land on their finger. and have a bird fly by and see an eggshell on the ground from a baby bird that just hatched. Nature and cities don't have to be two separate things. We don't have to divide ourselves from nature. That's a complete contrivance, and it's completely ridiculous, and it hurts us and it hurts nature. So, I think there's definitely a way to turn that abusive relationship into a very positive and nurturing one for both people and nature.
Yeah. So the other thing too is, so in Reno, we have a lot of old housing that, they're tearing down like huge amounts of city blocks. And it would have been so great for them to actually plan for those areas to be big enough to wipe off a lot of the carbon that is collecting there. And a lot of the area is like 4 blocks to the freeway. Right. And so you think about all the negative carbon, that comes off cars. I mean, the soot off tires is just unbelievable, really. And tires being another one of the most toxic things on earth. I mean, they're hard to get rid of if you've got them laying around on your land. Nobody really wants them. So.
Yeah, and the metal shavings, heavy metal shavings, every time a person hits the brakes, a little bit of metal shaves off and falls onto the concrete and ends up in the waterway later.
Yeah. So, if we had like areas now, if we were adapting in cities and they were tearing down old areas that were no longer working, and made, positive carbon areas out of them instead, this could be a way that we could transition from the kind of, urban lifestyle that we have into one that's going to help with the, bad carbon mass and being able to take it down in a good way. So, I mean, like I think about, I'm sure that you lay awake at night too. You think about things laying in bed, but I think about all this stuff, like how do we transition,
Yeah, a just transition and a transition toward a desired future. Because right now we're charging in this stampede to a place where we don't want to go. We're about to go off a cliff, and it's scary territory. So, but imagining a way out of it is one of the first steps. Is imagining that those cityscapes where there's trees everywhere. There's grass, there's birds, there's wildlife, and it all mingles together. There's this biophilic cities network that I think is really interesting, and you'd like to look into. Philia meaning love, and bio meaning life. So it's life-loving cities, and Singapore is one of them. Austin is one of them, and there's this push to like make these spaces better for us. We experience lower stress levels, lower anxiety, lower depression when we have nature around us. It nurtures us. It feeds us psychologically. And
I'm getting to the point now where I was telling a friend of mine the other day that I can't actually, because I've been living in my van, that my life is around being mostly outside all the time or having some kind of contact with outside. And that, being indoors is like tough for me. So everywhere I go indoors now, I feel like it's a cattle feedlot. I feel like I'm being herded, like all the spaces are developed to herd you into a certain area, even in your house. You've got all these walkways and Walmart, and I go in there and I just feel like I'm being forced down and then, diverted into the last part, probably into the feed pen, which is like the peace center in a lot of these stores. So I have I
think it's people ranching. The US people ranch. It's a big old people ranch.
Yeah, and I get a lot of anxiety when I walk in, and I feel now that I'm being herded, because I feel like my thoughts are being herded. Everything's being controlled and herded. And as I move more and more working with soil and ideas and thoughts and philosophies around it. And, I'm not very good at living in like full on urban settings anymore. And so for me, it's been a little bit complicated since I still have to kind of work in a lot of those settings, and I'm not able to completely walk away from it and be free range completely.
Right. I feel the struggle there. I'm on the same page. I go into the city to make it better, and every time it has it pulls. It's the little vampire. it sucks on me a little. It draws some of my life force out. It's tough. It is anxiety inducing, and I think it's designed that way to, because stressed out and anxious people have a tendency to try
Spend
and
more,
fill that void and buy more things. So there, it's quite a trap, and be on the way out of it. Really, I feel like working on living a lifestyle that runs parallel to it, but is not in that cattle chute.
Right. Well, and I figure if I'm feeling it, a lot of other people, must be feeling it. And I collect really weird things, because I'd like to do work with phenomenology, which was this course that I took through, Steiner College, which is unbelievable. It's spiritual science, your perception about what's going on with the environment. It's really good. But so I have this thing with wasps, like paper wasps, and their nests. And so like wherever I see them hanging in big trees where they're not in them anymore, I like try to get them down, and keep them. So I have all these boxes of like birds' nests.
I have so many of those same boxes.
And I study this stuff because recently I've been finding a lot of birds' nests in the deserts where they use like a lot of things that we put into the environment, which wouldn't be in their environment. And I see a lot of, I did a little video on my YouTube channel and showed like where the pink insulation they found that's in part of their nest. I mean, which wouldn't be good for them to breathe in. It wouldn't be good near their skin. It wouldn't be good for their eyes. It could make them, go blind. And then they have their babies, that they're having in these nests where they have things that are, not really healthy. Right. But because they don't have the things growing in their environment, like long grasses and stuff like that, they don't, like in the desert, they have to go out and forage material to build a nest from. And a lot of it's not going to be good.
Right.
So,
and we're just like those birds. We're just doing the best we can with what's around us and what's in our environment. And it seems like more and more the environment keeps getting deprived, and it's harder and harder to find what's needed. So, create spaces that provide what's needed, so you don't have to hunt around for it. It's going to grow there.
Yeah.
Because you put it there.
Yeah. And and then you adapt it for the environment. You look at the bird's nest when they fall out of the end of the tree in your environment and you go, oh, what do they need that I might be able to grow that's going to make this bird nest process better for them, so that they're not going and getting insulation from my neighbor's house who has a garbage hoard over there.
Right, yeah. Toxic spaces create toxic animals full and people filled with toxins. So if we want ourselves and the world around us to be healthy, starts with a healthy foundation.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so let me give out the information. So if you want to, talk to Shannon Brown and see what she's got going on, the only social media that she has at this time is on Facebook, and her page is called Ecosystem Regeneration Artisans. And she has, when I was looking at it, she has a couple designs that she puts up there, graphic designs of different kinds of gardens that she's working with. And these are small scale. Some of them are small scale gardens, so people can put them in their yard easy and effortlessly. You can find me on Facebook, Bridgette Lyn Dolgoff, or you can find me on my YouTube channel also, which is Consciousness of Economics and Urban Farm Project. And if you would like to donate to the work that I do outside of the radio show, you can go to PayPal and use consciousnessofeconomics at Gmail to send me a nice little donation. Or if you would like me to do some work for you, and Shannon needs work too, so she needs some paid work, so you should really get to know her if you want to make some changes in your world. Also, don't forget to do our funding. We've got advertising for Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and then we've got the funding. Please donate to us. We also have heirloom seeds that you can buy. So we have all kinds of ways that you can help support us. All right, so now we've got, 10. We have like about 20 minutes maybe to the 57 point where the show ends. What do you want to talk about now? Is there anything that you haven't offered, Shannon, talking with rain gardens and flood mitigation that you think is important for the last period?
Let's see. So there's so much that I feel like being from Texas, there's this kind of sense of independence. We can do this, pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of thing. Don't wait on the government to help you. It's a big part of the mentality here. And it's also a help your neighbor kind of thing. So what this kind of comes down to is we can all help each other do better. And it's a small thing. It's something that takes, depending on the size of your garden, I've done one in half a day, it's 4 feet wide by 4 feet long, and it's tiny, and it doesn't store a whole lot of water, but it has a tremendous impact in terms of the amount of life I see in that spot. These things can just, it's basically all you have to do is make sure that you've got it on contour so that the water doesn't run out the side. Water is self-leveling. It wants to sit level. So as long as your bowl has a nice level area in it that the water can sit, you're going to catch and hold that water. You don't want it to run off the side and create an erosion problem, because that's the opposite of conserving soil and water. It's very important that these things remain on contour. And if you want any help, designing these or talking it through, I can help you out. No matter where you are, we can look at it on a map. We can use the magic of LIDAR to, figure out exactly what the contours of your land are so that those swales or basins sit really nicely in the land and catch and hold that water. There's some great work being done here in Central Texas by the Earth Repair Corps. And it's this volunteer organization that comes together to dig these structures and put them in on farms. So we'll dig out a swale and we'll pile up the soil on the downhill side to make a berm, and we'll plant fruit trees in it. And the fruit trees get extra water when it rains, because that rainwater, rather than running off and going immediately into a storm drain or into the creek, sits in the land and nurtures those trees for a long period of time. It's a really incredibly beautiful thing to see fruit trees that are planted on flat ground or ground that's on a slope. After 5 years, they're still, kind of small. And then right next door to them, at this place called Thigh High Gardens, where I have my native plant nursery, they have these trees that were planted 2-3 years after the first set of trees, but they were planted on the berm with a rain garden or a swale behind them. And the younger trees are twice as big as the older trees, just because of the amount of water that they're being provided with by that earthwork. It just takes a little bit of digging. You dig a hole and get in there and start catching the water. That's, if I was to give a piece of advice to anyone who wanted to do better about caring for the land, I'd say get a shovel and dig a hole, make sure it's on contour, make sure you're going to catch the water, and just start catching water, because what happens when you do that is just amazing. The regeneration starts to happen. We just make one small change, and the ripple effect, the wave that forms after that, is tremendous. You get this wave of life, this explosive abundance, as some people here like to say. It's incredible. Kirby Fry is one of the permaculture teachers here, and Earth Repair Corps is one of his big projects. And over 5 years, over 45 of these projects have gone in to put in berms and swales in schools, in local organic farms. And when I say berm and swale, that's another term for rain garden. There's all this, we're talking different languages, we're saying different words, but we all mean the same thing, and we all have the same goal. And that's to catch the water on the land, hold it there, slow it down, spread it out, sink it in so that it can nurture the trees, it can nurture the grass. It can nurture everything around it. Water is life, so keep life close and hold on to it because it's so, so precious. And nowhere teaches you that like the desert. And Central Texas has certainly been teaching that lesson and showing just how powerful water is. You know, it can be a powerful destructive force when it comes through in a flash flood and just rips buildings off their foundation, which I've seen the destruction along the Blanco River after the Memorial Day flood of 2015. And it's tragic and it's horrifying how powerful that destruction can be. But also on the flip side of that destruction, there's this creative force. And so what side of the coin do we want to be on? Do we want to be on the side of destruction or creation? And most of the time, in fact, pretty much all the time, in order to create something, you have to destroy something. But so far, it seems like our civilization has been destroying something good to create something bad. Why aren't we changing our way of living so that we create something good and destroy something bad? The day that I get to get out there with a jackhammer and bust open my first parking lot and build a rainwater harvesting garden on it, I will be so elated. And that day is going to come. I'm going to transform a dead, lifeless parking lot where the water runs off and goes away, carrying oil and heavy metals and all kinds of nasty stuff and creating flash floods downstream. And I'm going to bust that up and I'm going to turn that into a natural area where water sinks into the ground and nurtures life. We can create oases. We can create paradise. It's totally within our grasp. We just have to actually get out there with a shovel and do it. Carry some stones, dig some holes. The solutions are surprisingly simple. It's just a matter of mustering the energy to do it. And it's fun, you know, to get a group of friends together and do this. When we have these events to build swales, it's a big party. We have lots of food and we have beer and we have a great time. We camp out, we sit around a fire, we talk, we share stories, we connect. We build community by making the land more resilient. The more resilient land and more resilient community. That's what it's all about, is creating our desired future so that we're resilient and we're strong for whatever comes our way. And rain gardens are a small piece of that, but it's a very attainable piece. If you've got a gutter on your house, a downspout, and the water's coming out of there and flowing down your driveway, figure out a way to divert that into your soil. Catch it, hold it, dig a little trench, and you'll be amazed to see what comes up, how much faster everything grows when you give that soil water. Soil for water. And water for soil. They work together. That's the foundation of all life, is in those two things. There's a famous quote that goes, despite all our accomplishments, we owe our existence to the first 6 inches of topsoil and the fact that it rains. So what the mission of a rain garden is to honor that and to say, we're going to nurture this topsoil, and we're going to help it build organic matter. We're going to help it store water. And we're going to hold that rain. And the amount of life that comes back to that is amazing. I encourage everyone to try rain gardens. It's kind of an addictive thing. Once you start digging basins and building your gardens into the ground rather than up out of it, it's a tremendous transformation.
I agree. The more that you just, check the soil, maybe touch it, take a look at it, put it in your mouth, swivel it around sometimes. And the other thing too, so I try to connect things with people. So we lose the topsoil, which has the microbial mass, and it becomes sterile. The more sterile we become. So people think that they can take all these supplements, they can take all this stuff, to have health care, or, they're even involved. I've been a traditional osteopath for a really long time. And so part of my work returning back to the soil, as almost every spiritual text tells you that, basically your body was created from the dirt, and the dirt you shall return, right? So when you look at like dark field hematology, I had a really good friend of mine who is a dark field hematologist, super amazing, probably the best blood reader in the United States. And I would go and they would just prick it once and they get one blood sample, and then they look below into the microbial level. They don't even go to the cell because they need to figure out what's going on microbially in order to figure out why the cells are doing what they're doing or what kind of disease. And all of it starts pretty much, from inflammatory issues, which is not enough proper nutrient, not enough proper water, and not enough proper air. So the cell is not holding itself together, right? So we're the same as dirt.
Yeah, we are absolutely.
Our blood, my native teacher used to say, the blood is the crystals, is the same. Our blood in our body is the same as the crystals that we find in the ground. And it's like a liquid crystal. And recently I interviewed this guy named Roger Spur of Mud Fossil University, and he was saying the same thing. They're testing giants. They're finding stones that were giants that have been turned to stone, like giant humanoids. And they're actually doing DNA testing on them, and they're finding, in the blood, that the blood is turning to different types of metals and crystals, when it dried, when they died. And so it was like fossilized. This is fascinating. So, but the thing is that we are the same as the soil. So the soil has no microbes in it. We have no microbes in our body. And the most important, probably 3 nutrients are sunlight, and also the sunlight that goes into the plants and the sunlight that goes into the water that needs to charge our cells. And then also the sunlight that goes into our body and helps us to manifest certain types of vitamins. And also the microbes, the micromass that goes back into our system. Everybody's into this whole bacteria gut and having a good gut and everything. Well, you're still taking pharmaceutical probiotics. The original is what's in the soil, which is the microbes, getting that microbial density back into your body so that the microbes can break down the stuff that's old. So if you don't have enough microbes in your system and you're not operating like a really good, strong compost, your body's not breaking down the old really rapidly and then regenerating it into something new. So our bodies are like identical to compost and soil. And if we don't be really careful about what we're doing with the 6 inches of soil and those biological nutrients such as water and microbes and sunlight nutrient, those are like the basis of all life. It's the base of everything that is created on this planet, or grows or regenerates or restorates or has been here longer than we've been here. But so when I tell people, when I tell people about healthcare and I explain to them that your health is really tied up in what you're going to be eating and participating in. So if you're not even growing, if you don't have your own compost, I teach them how to do all this stuff and grow 25% of your own food in your own soil in your own yard with your own water and have a relationship with it. You don't have health. There's no possible way that you can have health. I mean, the average salad in a grocery store, even organic, 3 days after it's cut, has no nutritional value left in it. And it's been washed. It'll even say on the label, been washed 6 times. Great. Then you just washed all the bacteria off, which is vitamin B. All the types of vitamin B are a bacteria. You just wiped all that off. And then you just wiped off all the microbial material that is the main reason I'm going to be eating that plant that was grown in the dirt. So
that's so fascinating. There's so much to learn from you about the way the eye functions as an ecosystem. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
But you think about this kind of stuff. And when I went back to biodynamic farming, school and how all this stuff was working and everything I was learning, I was like, Well, hell, we don't have health because anything that we're going to take as far as like a supplement or whatever else, number one, we're missing the baseline nutrients, which is the microbial mass, the bacterias, which function as vitamin Bs, those go into our system, and the sunlight component, and then also the water, fresh water component. Those are like the baseline nutrients that aren't even really discussed in health, even in alternative health or holistic health or homeopathic health. They want to integrate other stuff into the system, which is not biological, because if it was biological, it would already be inherent in your system, right? Or the system that's operating around you. So anything that's added in could potentially cause an imbalance and disease as well. So you just start to think about, like, the only way that we're really going to have health on this planet, the only way we're going to have clean water, the only way that we're going to actually really have health, that we can cure any kind of disease that there is, the only way that we're going to clean the air, the only way that we're going to clean this whole party up and operate, better into the future, has a lot to do with the soil and what we're individually doing with that soil.
Right. Each of our individual actions toward the soil and water, they all add up to create our collective experience of this planet and the way we care for it. So it takes a lot of us getting together to, transform our lifestyle and really think and put some intention into doing things in a good way so that we're healthy and our children are healthy and the land around us is healthy, and all we tend the garden. We tend to it. We keep it healthy. We're the keeper of the garden, not the destroyer of it. And I think there's been a lot of people that have gotten lost and trained in a way that's not healthy for life, not going to perpetuate life. It's a really unfortunate thing, but I'm so glad to have this opportunity to talk with you about this. And
no, I'm super excited. You're going to be like my new friend, so you'll be hearing from me a lot.
Excellent.
Outside of here. But okay, before we go, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show. And this has just been like a super great conversation. Just really, really have enjoyed this conversation. And I do radio mostly for me. I see people who interest me and I get them on because I want to learn. So anyway, Shannon Brown, thank you so much, everybody. Have a great Saturday. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message. Revolution Radio.
You don't see it, do you? How close we are to absolute chaos? The sick ones are sitting on their fat asses, eating and drink themselves into a stupor, polluting the world without a second thought while it goes down the toilet. Nobody wants to do the nasty work. The shit that we all just think about. Most good citizens are just along for the ride and then bitch and moan and complain about everything when it doesn't work out. Not me. Get it done.
Revolution Radio, where we do the nasty work. www.freedomslips.com.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. and may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all!
See how the trouble you've started? Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it. Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution